Can you hear us?
Yep.
Great.
Okay.
All right. So welcome to our section. I think our participants, quite a few of them have joined in already. So maybe we can just start now and maybe some will log in later. So welcome all for joining our section. So we are Link Center. I'm Miss Karen.
Hi, I'm Farah.
Yes, so today is our Human Library Sharing session. It's our third section, and we have invited a British lady who is doing amazing work in Hong Kong for the EM community to share with us her story and the work she is doing. Hi, Rona. Thank you for joining us. So before I pass to Farah to have a talk with Maggie, maybe I can just share what is our center and the EM community in Hong Kong. So Link Center is one of the 7 centers sponsored by the Home Affairs Department of Hong Kong. And we support free service for ethnic minorities, any non-Chinese community in Hong Kong. So when we talk about ethnic minority, a lot of the people will think, oh, maybe like Indian, Pakistani, Nepalese, but actually in Hong Kong, more than 90% are Chinese ethnicity. So people who are non-Chinese are considered as ethnic minority in Hong Kong. So that's why we have welcomed a British lady, Maggie, today for our sharing. So in Hong Kong, actually in 2016, there are already 263,000 of ethnic minority in Hong Kong, excluding domestic worker. So it takes up like 3.8% of the whole Hong Kong population. So there's a lot of different ethnicity friends with us. And however, although that we have this large population, our friends are still having different difficulties in Hong Kong, especially for education, because as you may know, we do not have Chinese as an additional language in schools. So the school have to make up their own teaching materials for the EM students. So, or you can say non-Chinese students, which is the word used by the Education Bureau. And when we talk about the ethnic minority studying in public or direct subsidy secondary or primary school in Hong Kong, it rises up from 10,000 students to 20,000 students for the last 10 years. So actually, the population is rising for the people who study in Hong Kong, but still we do not have a subject that can teach them Chinese in like an additional language way. So today we have, and Maggie will share with us what she thinks about the education and the work that she's doing. So let's not wait longer. So I'll pass to Farah to talk with Maggie. Thank you.
Thank you, Karen. Hi, Maggie. Finally to see you, although we're not face-to-face, at least on Zoom. Yes.
Hi. Thank you for inviting me today. It's a really interesting project.
No, it's an honor to have you. I'm actually very interested to hear your views. We've spoken on the phone before, and I felt that whatever you shared with me is actually very useful for the EM community, and I feel like you can bring a lot into the subject. But let's start with some information about your background, because I also found that to be very interesting. So I know you moved to Hong Kong like a while back. It's been a long time, but I would still like to hear the thought process behind your decision to move to Hong Kong.
We came to Hong Kong in 1995.
Yes.
And before that, I did Chinese at university. And my husband is Chinese. He's from Shanghai, and we were living in London for about 4 years. And he wanted to come back to China to work. And I was not very keen on going to mainland China then. In the mid-90s, it was just like a big building site, you know. Really, it was so dusty. All the roads were just full of construction projects. It's very dusty. And it was quite easy for him to get a job in Hong Kong. And this was pre-handover, so I also did not need a visa.
Right.
So it was a fairly easy option for us to both to come here and try something new, because we were quite young and we wanted to try something new.
Right, that's interesting. But another thing that I also asked you on the phone, and I found it really interesting, is a British person, a white person living in the UK, what was the thought process that went through your head when you decided to take Chinese as an additional language? I mean, that is like so interesting, and I've never heard of that before.
I went to a state comprehensive school in the north of England, and I did French and German, and I like languages. So I went to university and did French and German, actually. But there were some other girls in my block in my flat, actually, in my shared accommodation, who were doing Chinese. And I just thought, wow, that's quite interesting, because at the beginning of the year, they knew nothing at all about Chinese. And at the end of the year, you could see some very tangible progress. Whereas for me doing French and German, it was just sort of like more of the same. Once when I was back home at my mum's place, I was looking through some old books, and I found some pieces of paper, and I remembered I'd gone to the school library and there was a book about different languages, and there was one about Chinese, and I'd copied, and I'd actually written 我是美国人.
Oh, okay.
And I didn't know what I was writing, I'm sure, at the time. But I'd had an interest, I think. But, you know, going to that sort of school, there was not everyone went to university for a start, and there was no one really to ask, what do you think about doing Chinese at university? It was just such a complete unknown, you know, so I just did French and German. But then when I saw my friends doing Chinese, I thought, oh, that's quite interesting. It's nice to go to university and do something completely new. And in those days, our university was paid for by the government, and we went to China in the second year, and it was all paid for, you know, by the government. And you know, it was a wonderful opportunity to do something very different and have really a life-changing experience.
So how did you find China at that time when you went? That was a while ago.
Well, this was the mid-80s.
Right.
So it was a fantastic time to go to China, because it was on the brink of change, but had really not changed very much. And we were studying, but, you know, we had long holidays. We went by train and bus all around China. We went to Tibet, and by bus, went from Shanghai to Tibet by bus, by train and bus. It took about 7 days. We just traveled so much on these lovely old trains, and it was fascinating. It was a wonderful time to be in China.
Right. So it would not have been that much of a cultural shock to move to Hong Kong, was it?
No, moving to Hong Kong was not a cultural shock. I think it's a cliche to say it's where West meets East, or East meets West.
Right.
But it's true. There's truth in that. Because I'd done Chinese at university, I had some really good classmates here. My husband could get all his Chinese food. I could get some Western food. So it worked on a number of levels, yes.
Right. So was it easy to find authentic British food here when you moved?
It probably was, although, you know, I'm not particularly a foodie person.
Right. Okay, so you're not really into that. But where would you go normally for, like, if you actually want to have a very authentic British, let's say, a breakfast?
Now, in Hong Kong? Honestly,
I wanted to try that.
Honestly, I have no real idea. I mean, I don't know. I really don't know. I know there's a good chip shop in Sai Kung. British food is not really that well known, I don't think.
Not in Hong Kong, yeah.
And I'm not, honestly, I'm not.
Tea in some really high-end restaurants.
In Marks and Spencer's.
Yeah, they do English tea or something, but yeah, it's maybe a bit hard to find. Now, I know that you're very serious about children's education. So how would you describe the education system in Hong Kong?
It's complicated, is how I would describe it. Just now you asked me if I had any culture shock coming to Hong Kong. And I didn't. I have lots of Chinese friends, and, you know, we both speak varying degrees of Chinese, and a lot of my friends were Chinese. Didn't have any culture shock until I put my kids in local school.
Okay.
Then I had culture shock. It's an extremely different approach in the local schools. But also it is complicated. Just this morning I was talking to a young father who's put his child in K1 of a kindergarten, and I know that he wants his child to learn very good Chinese, and I said, well, is it a Chinese medium of instruction kindergarten? And he wasn't sure. He wasn't sure, and we looked up the name, and clearly it's not. And he didn't realize that you make that decision when the child's age 3,
Yeah.
and it really determines what happens, because it's very, very difficult to go back into the Chinese medium of instruction system if you've gone any distance down the English medium of instruction system.
Okay.
Almost
So,
impossible. So it's complicated, and parents need a lot of help to navigate.
so what are some resources you would suggest to EM parents in Hong Kong when they decide to put their kids in a school?
Wow, that's a very big question. I think whenever we're talking about children going into the local schools, it's very important that we look carefully, are they in the Chinese medium of instruction schools? Or are they in the English medium of instruction schools? It's almost that divided. Now, unfortunately, there's also a grey area in the middle where parents think their children are going to a Chinese medium of instruction school, but the schools are sort of segregating those kids off. So they're not really benefiting from having a Chinese medium of instruction immersion experience. And their experience of learning Chinese language is actually going to be very similar to a child in an English medium of instruction school. So I think it's quite complicated, but there are some overlaps in the experience. Now, the first thing I would say is get the Pleco dictionary on your phone. So Pleco is spelled P-L-E-C-O.
Right.
P-L-E-C-O. And it's got a picture of a Chinese, the character is fish there, that one at the top.
Yes.
That's what it looks like. Now, this is a dictionary that once you've got it on your phone, you don't need Wi-Fi to use it.
Yeah.
It's free. Well, there are some add-ons that you can pay for. And if you look on our website, which we can maybe look at later, but there's some add-ons that maybe we would recommend. They're not expensive.
Right.
But you need a dictionary if you're going to learn another language or learn in another language. And Chinese dictionaries are a bit difficult to use. I mean, it's good to have those skills, but they're slow. They're slow to use. And if you have a lot of homework to get through, you don't want to, you need speed.
Yeah, that's true.
You just want speed, right? So Pleco is a very good dictionary. It's very accessible to people who are not native Chinese speakers. I have no commercial interest in Pleco, by the way, but just now we were talking about being in China in the 1980s. In those days, we had one dictionary, big thing like this. It was green.
Cool.
So wherever we went in China, we put it in our rucksack. We'd carry this huge thing around with us, and it was difficult to use, and it actually had a lot of words missing, that they didn't feel like putting in. But Pleco is very good for Chinese to English, which is probably 80% of what you need when you're doing Chinese in the schools. It's not quite as good for going English to Chinese. A lot of dictionaries are just not very sophisticated. Going English to Chinese, and particularly Cantonese, of course. Next to impossible.
So what do you think about, like in Hong Kong, the teaching medium of Cantonese and Mandarin languages? Is it difficult to pick up the language in the local education medium? For EMs especially?
I don't think anybody picks up Chinese, unfortunately.
Right.
If you went and moved to Italy, put your kids in the local school and you let them play with the local kids when they come back from school, and they would pick up Italian.
Right.
They would. But there's too many barriers to learning Chinese in Hong Kong. Some of these are sociological, about the way our communities coexist. Some of these are to do with the education system. And some of these are to do with the language itself. And so nobody picks up, very few people pick up Chinese, unfortunately. We have to work really hard. And so I don't know how we break that down now, but if if you put your child in a Chinese medium of instruction school, and your child is in what we call a low concentration of ethnic minorities in that school, then they have a really good chance of gaining native level Chinese.
So basically, if there are less non-Chinese in that school, then there's a better chance of them to learn Cantonese or Chinese.
100% spoken Cantonese. The longer they stay in that Chinese medium of instruction school, they, you know, the ethnic minority people I meet here who speak really, really great Cantonese, most of them have gone to Chinese medium of instruction school.
That's quite true.
Right. I don't, but they're going to need support with reading and writing.
So you had come up with a Chinese learning kit for non-Chinese students. Would you tell us a bit more about that? Because I visited your website and it was very interesting, and I'd love for you to tell all our listeners about it.
Well, I think acknowledging the complicated nature of the education system here and of learning Chinese. So a number of us, we're a group of parents basically, and we've all had our children in Chinese schools. And we've all really wanted them to learn to speak Cantonese and learn Chinese to a high level. And it's not been easy, you know? And we wanted to create a platform where we can bring support together. What happens is this school does this school does that, and there isn't really a platform to bring it together. Now, our platform is not complete by any means. We're quite a new organisation. And learning to build a website is giving me grey hairs, I can tell you that. But we're moving forward. And I'd like to perhaps just show you a little bit of the website.
Sure, please do.
Don't mind, I'm going to share the screen. And so we've called our organisation Chinese as an additional language because I really don't like the label non-Chinese speaking. It's very exclusive. It's very negative, really. It's like, you know, these children can be in a Chinese school for 10 years and speak Chinese really well, and they're still called non-Chinese speaking. And that's not acceptable to me, you know. Let's talk about Chinese as an additional language, because it's not necessarily because you're an ethnic minority, any of this. And if we keep talking about it when children are not doing well in learning Chinese in school, if we keep saying it's because they're ethnic minority, we're somehow pushing the problem onto the colour of somebody's skin. And really, a lot of the problems, I think, are about the way Chinese is taught. You know. So anyway, if you have a look on our website, we have something about us, we have something about what we're doing, and I'll just go left to right. Okay. If you click on Chinese schools, we have something about the types of school, because it is complicated, and if anyone's looking at what to do about what type of school, just have a read of that. But for now, I just want to highlight this one. In case you have your kids already in primary school, and if you're using any of these textbooks, just want to try and make it more accessible and support you, and particularly now, because at the moment we have online learning. So, for example, click on a random textbook. This is one of the more commonly used textbooks. So let's say you're using this textbook, and let's say you're on chapter 17. Let's say your child is sitting at home and can't do the homework because they can't make head or tail of what's going on. So here we have a glossary of the main vocabulary. So this is the vocabulary in the text on page 8. And this will help you read that text. So we haven't written out the text. There's no need to do that. You've got the textbook. But this will help you break down the text so you can read it. And then we have a few grammar notes. Because one of the issues is that the children are barely, I'm talking about children in the Chinese medium of instruction schools now, by the way, the children have barely got a grasp of spoken Cantonese. But all the materials are in standard written Chinese.
Yes.
So this is quite a cognitive leap, you know, to go from just picking up the Cantonese and then it's all written in this sort of, it sounds rather unnatural when, you know, Mandarin is read out loud in Cantonese, basically. So we've put a few grammar notes. It might go over the head of these children. We don't know. Or it might make sense. So, for example, this is a very simple example that in the text somewhere it said, it's introduced an adjective and it said han go, for example. Han go. And we're just saying, look, in actual fact, in spoken Cantonese, you wouldn't say that. You say ho go.
Go, yeah.
So just so that they have a little bit of understanding about the differences. And here we have a translation as well.
Right.
Just to help people make head or tail of it. Now, going back up, the other thing we do is we've put the main vocabulary on flashcards.
Right.
So that parents have got some way of helping with dictation. So you would look at that and you'd say, Gan, how do I write that? Oh, I can't remember how to write it. Well, there it is.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. These are the main vocabulary. Or you look at that and you think, oh, I can't remember what it means.
Oh, just click it.
Yeah.
Wow.
Now, there's also ways to mark the cards so that if you can't remember it, you mark the ones you can't remember. And you just concentrate the ones on you can remember. Now I don't know how to get back to this, the proper screen. So these are some of the main textbooks, and I would really like parents to know about this because I do think a lot of parents are struggling. The children are struggling, the parents are struggling. So we're doing the Chinese ones, and we've also, this is Xiuya Sengsik. This is a general studies Sengsik book. And we're also starting to move through P2 as well. If parents had a textbook that they wanted us to do a glossary for, we could probably help. So I hope you don't mind me just showing you a little bit more about.
Please go on.
Under learning journeys, I'll be quick, but we want to give you some role models of what it's like to study in the Chinese medium of instruction schools. The ups and the downs. And if you click on these pictures, you can read an article and you can also watch a short video. And this is Himi, this is Hassan, this is Ken and Dulcie. And Dulcie, Ken, they've all gone through secondary school. They've done primary and they've all gone through the local system. Some have done all the way in Chinese medium instruction schools. Some have done primary in Chinese medium of instruction and then have gone on to English secondary. So I want to try to reflect their journeys, the ups and the downs. And then we want to put some resources together in a place, because one thing parents have told us is outside of school, it's really hard to support Chinese. You know, if you're an ethnic minority parent or you don't speak Chinese at home, you go on YouTube, it's actually quite hard to find Cantonese videos unless you can type in Peppa Pig Guangdonghua or Peppa Pig Putonghua or whatever. If you can't type that little bit of Chinese, it's actually quite hard to find them. So I won't go through them now, but if you would like to have a look, we've got some songs for older kids, we've got some songs for children, we've got a selection of cartoons that you can use as a starting point. We're also doing some Chinese poems, because even in P1 they start doing Chinese poems and they're hard. So for the Chinese poems, for example, we have a video, and we have
Oh.
the English translation with some explanation. These are poems that are very commonly used in primary schools. Again, just to try to make it accessible and more interesting, actually. It's more interesting, isn't it, if you know what's going on? You know?
Very true.
So those are some of our resources. And then we're also putting research about this issue and news articles about this issue all in one place. So this is a collection of anything that's in the SEMP or anything like that. So hopefully that's useful for researchers, anyone who's interested in this area. I've probably spoken for too long, but
Yeah, and we have some readers who are very appreciative of your recommendations of PECO and also of the resources you just introduced us about the primary one books. Someone was asking if you would have P3, P5 later, like would the books be, would you be publishing more of these?
yes, I mean, I've already done some of P3 of that Chinese book, but we haven't loaded it up yet. And yeah, I mean, if people want it, we can put it up there. It takes a while. It's quite labor intensive to do. But I can do it. I just need, and then I need to get it checked and put up. I think we need to start getting some more volunteers now to help with the checking process as well. But absolutely, if people need it, if people find it useful, we will do it for sure.
Do you have like enough visitors coming onto your sites right now to look at these resources?
Well, we're a relatively new organisation, and we're not sophisticated enough to check our clicks.
Okay.
Or I know roughly how you're supposed to do that, but SEO or something it's called, is it? Or we haven't gone there yet.
Are you asking for volunteers to help you translate all this?
Yes, we would definitely love some more volunteers for sure. Volunteers to help check it as well. We have a small group of volunteers who are able to do the translation work very quickly, but I just want someone to quickly check it. When you're writing Chinese, there's so much room for error, particularly when you're doing it quickly, because the typing's all based on predictive text coming up, you know. But yes, of course, moving forward, we hope to have more volunteers, you know.
We do have a lot of viewers who are very appreciative of these resources because I think a lot of people don't know about this at all. So it's actually really helpful. Another question is like under the COVID-19 conditions now, a lot of kids are basically going to school at home, like the parents have to teach them. And I guess teaching them Chinese or Mandarin is a really hard thing. So apart from your website, which is very helpful, are there any other resources, you know, that parents can use to teach their kids Chinese, Cantonese, Mandarin? Like any websites that they can refer to?
I think for Cantonese, it's quite difficult, actually. I mean, you can, if your children are still young, you can go on YouTube and simply type in learn Cantonese, and you'll come up with Cantonese 101 and a number of things like that. It's quite hard though, because they're really aimed at adults.
Right, so most of it is basically more adult-centric than for children.
Yes, it's more adult-centric, and then by the time your children get to mid-primary school, they're probably over it, because it's things like, you know, ya yi sam and hou gou, hou sai, you know, this sort of stuff that they already know, you know. So for Cantonese, it's really hard, and I think the only thing you can do is try to get them more input. And by which I mean force them to watch Cantonese cartoons, force them to watch Cantonese television or something like that. There are some good, then looking at Mandarin, I think Mandarin's a little bit easier. If you don't mind paying, that's a problem. You know, there's things like, there's companies called Mandarin Matrix. There's Chinese Pod. Chinese Pod is fantastic. It's amazing. But it's more aimed at adult learners, really. So again, I think if we're talking about children here, and I think we probably are, aren't we? It's fair to say probably parents are most concerned about their children in primary school. It's about getting input. It's about if you have Netflix, you know, choosing Mandarin audio or choosing Cantonese audio, looking at our cartoons and using that as a starting point, and insisting your children watch Chinese cartoons. You can't go wrong. You're just getting input, more and more input, which is excellent. Now, there are also some things which I can mention now, which are fantastic resources. Books like this, and now this is called a DigiPen.
Okay.
And there's lots of different companies that do it.
Right.
If there's any teachers on here, I'd love you to use your NCS grant to buy these. There's different types and different models. Now, I'm going to show you the principle of how it works on this book. I just turned it on.
Okay.
You can use a pen like this. Oh, I've got the wrong book. To read stories. So, and because for us, we want our children to have greater exposure to Chinese, and you get that through reading. But our kids can't read. There's too many words, and everybody needs a Chinese grandmother sat at home to get you reading. And if you don't have that, what do you do? Well, one thing you can do is get this DigiPen thing. So you point it to. So then.
Oh wow.
Oh, they're just. I mean, this is such a game changer. I feel. So you can point it at the text, and it will read the text for you. Shut up.
Oh wow, that's fascinating. It keeps going, like even after you've taken it away.
And they're very sophisticated because they'll do the illustrations as well.
Oh.
So they make reading possible for children who don't have a Chinese parent sitting at home.
And they'll be so happy to do that. It seems like something kids would love to do, just point the pen at something.
They do. We did a little pilot study to find out, you know, how they would work.
Exact name of the pen one of the reader wants to know. If I'll type it in for them, if you could spell it for me.
So I wonder if I can go into the chat if I stop showing my screen.
Sure.
Now, there's different ones. This is called Easy Read Book.
Okay. Easy Read?
This is Easy Read Book.
Okay.
Yeah. Now, this one, all the stories are downloaded onto that pen.
Okay. Right.
There are other types of pen where it has a microphone on. So a teacher could potentially read the textbook or read storybooks into her computer and then transfer it to a child's pen.
Okay.
So all the children in the same class could get it. So these are commercially available. You know, you sort of go online and buy them. And I think that's a great way to get your kids reading. Now, if your children are small, these things, if you have children in kindergarten, a lot of the bookshops sell this sort of thing.
Okay.
And if your kids are in kindergarten, they really need to be learning these characters. Because these characters, in Chinese, we don't have an alphabet, but we have building blocks of the language. Now, the problem is that if you sit at home with that and your child doesn't know what it is, nothing on the back. It's my pen. When in the conversation, he'll go off in.
Oh.
It's not much use, right?
Yeah.
So you really need a friend, a tutor, the security guard in your building to take these cards, and on the back they put what it means and they put how to sound it out, how to pronounce it.
Okay.
Then they are very useful, because you know your kids really, by the time they leave kindergarten, they need to know everything in this box, at least. Otherwise, they're going to find it very difficult at primary school. So this sort of resource exists. And now in the stationery shops here, these are very, very cheap.
Okay.
This is $12. This sort of.
Can you get it in a stationery shop, you mean? Like any stationery shop?
Pretty much.
Okay.
The stationery, you know, those sort of stationery shops that just sell everything.
Yes. When selling school books and everything.
Yes, I mean, this is from the stationery shop in Happy Valley. They're not expensive, and they're copybooks.
Okay.
But you really, ideally, you want them, the ones that say what it means. And of course, this one's got Mandarin pronunciation. If you're in a Cantonese school, again, get somebody to write the pronunciation for you, or look it up in Pleco. It wouldn't take long to get all these down.
Yeah.
The other thing about Pleco is it will play the sound out loud. So if you write the Cantonese romanization, which is JAP, and you think, what's that? If you play it in Pleco, you press it in Pleco, it will say, yeah.
Okay.
And then you know. So all Chinese children are doing this. All Chinese children are doing this, you know, they're copying. And I mean, research from Hong Kong University, from the researchers there, Catherine McBride and Professor Zhou at Education University, they've all done research, and copying helps you memorize. But I would like to add to that copying has to be meaningful. There's no point in copying something if you don't know what you're writing. So if we have any teachers on this group, if you send words home for dictation, please make sure that any of the children in your class who are from non-Chinese speaking families, make sure that they know what the character means and they know how to say it. And don't give them a hard time if they don't. Just write it next to it quickly.
Another thing I wanted to ask you is, you've spoken about these books, these resources, these pens. How do you think parents can go about to get the schools to invest in these products? Like, are there any channels through which they can bring their point of view to the teachers?
I hope that our organisation in the future will be able to make recommendations to teachers. Because the schools are getting a lot of money now. If they take children from non-Chinese speaking families, they get a considerable grant. And I've spoken to teachers who basically don't exactly know what to do with the money. They can hire a teacher, but then what? You know. So I really hope that we as an organisation can help point teachers in some interesting directions of what they can use that money for. Secondly, in terms of for parents, the first thing you can do is find other parents in your school and set up a WhatsApp group. And do consider some of the Chinese parents, because I made this mistake when my kids went to local primary school. I thought that I was the only white face there. I thought we were the only people that were essentially a non-Chinese speaking family. But I started to create an email group, because email was just coming in then. And I quickly found that there were other parents who looked Chinese, but actually were returnees from Canada and other places, or were Mandarin speakers. And they also felt very insecure. Some of them just couldn't read. And a lot of the issues connected to homework are issues about reading and writing Chinese. So they were actually all interested to find pragmatic, practical ways to deal with school notices or the homework. And sometimes I felt like the Chinese parents just knew what was going to be in the exam or the Xiutatiyim test or something. And somehow we didn't, and it was very useful to have a WhatsApp group. So do set up a group, parents, and so that you can discuss what helps you and what you found, and share your resources. There's no point in everybody sitting at home recording the textbook onto a digipen. Get one person to do it, send it to everyone.
Okay, got it. That's very helpful. So besides, you are working with quite a few organizations that help with EMs, like the Zubin Foundation. Would you like to talk a bit more about that?
There's a few organizations out there that it's worth mentioning. So the Zubin Foundation, I've been doing some work for. I did a piece of research about kindergartens, actually, which is quite interesting, which is on their website. And we're making some videos to help children who are going to attend Chinese medium instruction school, so that when they start, they already know a little bit of Chinese. So if the teachers say, Hey San, or, Pai Doi, they already have some idea. We've been making these videos for some time. We were just about to start filming in kindergartens when, of course, the COVID started.
Right.
So we're doing that with Zubin Foundation, and I really hope we can finish it sometime. So the Zubin Foundation do a lot of good work across a spectrum of issues that are that ethnic minority families would be interested in. There's an organization called Hong Kong Unison, who have also done a lot of research into educational matters in particular. And they also have volunteer tutors to some extent, but of course, a lot of has to be done online now, and there's never enough tutors. There's also the cheer centres as well, which will operate in a similar way to yours if people were looking for homework support after school. So there's a number of organisations out there that are interested in these areas and really trying to help.
Yeah, they do help a lot, all of these organizations. So another question we had is, what do you think the local Chinese people can do to help EMs integrate better into society? We have a lot of Chinese viewers, so it's an interesting question to them.
I think if we're talking about schools in particular, obviously the issue is schools need to accept people. They must not turn people away. That's not acceptable. And schools that are supposedly Chinese medium instruction schools, but which are actually segregating the kids, you have to think very carefully about that. On the one hand, I have a lot of sympathy for Chinese teachers because there's such a diverse range of needs. But we have to think of civil, compassionate, inclusive ways to deal with these issues, practical ways that focus on supporting Chinese learning without segregating communities. And I think the other thought is that for Chinese teachers or people who are connected to schools, one common thing now, one common way of using this extra money is simply to set up an after-school class.
Right.
So that's done with great heart and well-meaning. And of course, the more the better in some ways for Chinese, but you're also putting children from non-Chinese speaking families together again. Now, what about if we re-looked at that problem and we think, okay, all the children are going to live roughly in this area. In this area, are there any art classes in Cantonese? Are there any football teams in Cantonese? Is there any ice hockey around here that's in Cantonese? Let's reach out to the parents and suggest these after-school curricular activities which are in Cantonese.
Right.
It's sometimes actually quite hard for non-Chinese speaking families to find activities in Cantonese because they're all advertised in Chinese.
Yes.
And they're not necessarily very expensive.
Mm-hmm.
Places like St. James Settlement have quite cheap activities. I live in very middle-class Happy Valley, but right in the heart of Happy Valley, there's a St. James Settlement place, there's a library. They all have very cheap, extracurricular activities which will support Cantonese learning and help the children reinforce friendships in their local community. So I think we all have to look at ways to break down the barriers that do exist, unfortunately.
That's really helpful. So we have 10 minutes to go, and I'd like to see if our viewers want to ask you some questions. So if anyone have any questions for Maggie, please type them in. Can we unmute sorry, we have to unmute. Oh, okay. You can unmute yourself if anyone wants to unmute. Oh, someone wants to know a bit more about your children.
So I put my kids in local kindergarten, a Chinese medium of instruction kindergarten, and then Chinese medium of instruction primary school. And actually, I mean, how did I choose that primary school? And this is quite a good example of how nobody knows what's going on. So my children are older now. My son is 23, which is 19, right? And I didn't know anything. I didn't know anything about what schools were. I knew that I wanted them to go to Chinese medium of instruction school. And I was sat on a plane next to somebody and I was saying, oh yeah, I want them to go to Chinese medium instruction school, but I don't know anything. And he said, oh, in Happy Valley, there's a really nice school called Lingnam. I was like, oh, okay, that's, so, I mean, I found that school on the basis of that conversation. I think now, I don't think we really had websites so much in those days. But even now, the EDB website is a little bit tricky. And I find that parents really get information from other parents and from groups like Hong Kong Unison. There's a Facebook group called the Cantonese School Parents Group. Cantonese School Parents Group. And this is also a useful resource for all sorts of information. I think I may have referred to this before, that sometimes you feel like Chinese parents just know things, just know stuff, and stuff that we just don't know. And you know, it's you just have to talk to other parents to find things out. So my children went to kindergarten and then primary school, and then went to international school for secondary school. And so often people want to know, so how's their Cantonese? How's their Chinese? Is it fluent? It's fluent up to a point. So I would say they would not be sort of doing any interpreting for the United Nations anytime soon, you know. But the Chinese that they know sounds very natural. So I didn't know any Chinese till I was 20, age 20. And we have to start learning tones, you know. It's if you're from a non-tonal language, then learning tones is quite difficult. But if you put your kids in the local school, they just get that, you know. So they speak Chinese pretty well. And without any shadow of a doubt, it helps them feel that they are from Hong Kong.
Right. So another question here is actually from a teacher at a local school. This came to us directly. She said some EM parents seem not too serious towards their children's studies. They do not attend parents' meetings to discuss their kids' education. Colleagues and I feel helpless. What would you recommend us to do? That's a teacher's question.
I know, it's very difficult, isn't it? A lot of non-Chinese speaking families and ethnic minorities families for one thing, they're just working so damn hard. They're holding down a lot of different jobs. They may not have domestic helpers. Some of the women are a little bit restricted in to what extent they can move out on their own. Not all, of course, but there are a few societal challenges. And also, and this would be my parents' experience, coming from a British background, your kids go off to school, you expect the school to just sort things out. You don't expect that the parents have to do so much, right? My parents never helped me with my homework. They didn't talk to me about my exams. They didn't talk to me about what grades I was going to get or anything, you know? So Hong Kong is an extremely different educational culture. And I think at kindergarten level, if kindergartens can hold workshops or do it on Zoom and YouTube, so parents can watch it whenever they want, that explains that it's very different here. And so actually, just to answer your question, because I think the teacher said she was from primary school or secondary school, or
she didn't really specify.
But I appreciate your problem that you want to get parents involved and you want to tell them, look, you've got to be on board. It's difficult. You've got to support them. Perhaps YouTube is a way to do that. Perhaps recording videos and then sending it out to the parents so they can watch it in their own time. If you have any, try to encourage some more sort of switched on parents to get involved and to become ambassadors, so that these parents perhaps can do these YouTube clips, or they don't have to go on YouTube, sorry, can make little video clips and can communicate with the parents in their own language as well. Just to explain how different it is. Now, I would also say that just because parents don't come to your school and don't communicate with you, it doesn't mean to say that they don't want their children to learn well. Ethnic minority families, you know, see education as a way of integrating into Hong Kong life. And for some families, it's a way to help their children get a better job than the one they had. If you don't have good Chinese, it's hard to get a decent job. So how can we help them get really great Chinese without the help of their parents, perhaps? Now, when I sent my kids off to school and they're learning physics, I don't expect as a parent to have to teach them physics, right? But it's kind of different here, and it's particularly different for Chinese. So, you know, teachers, please be patient. Please reach out to organisations like ours and like Hong Kong Unison, where we can suggest really practical ways that you can support your kids. You've seen some of the sort of textbook help that we've done. You can print this out and put it in the hands of your children, your students. And if you want help doing any of the other materials, we can possibly help with that. You will have noticed that we used Yuping, romanization. The thought of learning Chinese without romanization is horrific. It's absolutely a nightmarish scenario to learn Chinese without romanization. So please consider using it. And if you're frightened as a teacher of providing Yuping, then look on ChineseConverter.com and go to Cantonese tools and look for Yuping converter, basically. And you can just paste in a whole load of characters and it will pop up in Yuping. It's quite easy. Honestly, teachers, don't be frightened of Yuping, but we need it. We need it on target vocabulary, not on all the text, but on your target vocabulary.
Another thing is, from my personal opinion about EM parents, is if they are of certain ethnicities, maybe they're not that educated themselves and they actually don't understand the teachers. So they don't want to show up in your school, or sometimes like They just feel embarrassed coming to school because they can't communicate with you. That's also a real problem. So maybe that's another thing that teachers need to tackle.
I think being proactively welcoming. There are some kindergartens here called Sun Island.
Yes.
Now, Sun Island are perhaps not always full-on Chinese medium immersion for ethnic minority families, but they are very welcoming. And if you look at the kindergartens, and I would say to other teachers, if you look at what they're doing, they are visually welcoming. And that's a wonderful thing that they do there. So I think other primary schools can please be proactive in trying to reach out, because even I was a bit intimidated by the primary schools. The only time I went into the primary school was if it was sports day. You know, there's quite a big gate on it. You had to press a button to get in, you know, and it was a little bit intimidating. So please, primary school teachers, be patient and be proactive and be constructive and help our kids, because people really want their children to learn Chinese. It's life-changing in Hong Kong.
That's true. We have another question. She said, where is better, like when is it better to learn about secondary schools from I think she wants to know where can she learn about secondary schools for her 10-year-old daughter. She says she's in P5, and what age is the best to transfer to a local, what is the best age to transfer from local to international school, do you think? So she has two questions basically.
Well, the first question about that, about secondary schools, if you're talking about secondary schools in the local system, I'm actually not the best person to talk to about that, because it's quite a long time since my kids were in school, and it really depends on your geographical district. I think, Olga, you're better asking on the Cantonese school parents group about that. Now, in terms of going from local to international school, the longer you keep your kids in the Chinese medium of instruction school, the better their Chinese will be. As long as you can support their English a bit. It depends on your own family background, doesn't it? If you can get your kids reading at home in English, then basically it's quite easy to go to international school. I mean, my son just thought he'd entered nirvana when he went to international school compared to Chinese primary school. You know, there's different challenges with international school. Got to be a lot more organized with your stuff, and you have to write a lot more in English. You know, it's not just remembering textbooks and then writing one line. You've got to write essays on everything. Even science will require writing essays and critical thinking. So it's very different, it's extremely different. But if you're not from a native Chinese speaking background and you've been in CMI primary, I think it's going to be quite easy going to international school, to be honest.
That's correct. Thank you so much, Maggie, for letting us know all of this information. So Karen has something to say.
Yeah, thank you, Maggie. I've been next to Farah and listening to your sharing, and from the chat box, and also the school teacher who approached us directly. I can see that our audience are from different backgrounds, like the teacher, some parents, some university students, some are future teachers or social workers. And we are very, very appreciative and grateful for you to share with us all these resources. And for the people who just interested to know how to spell the words that maybe Maggie just shared with us, you can just click into the chat box. We type in all the like organizations like Subin Foundation, Cheer Center, Hong Kong Unison, and the resources that Maggie shared with us. So you can just go online and search for the resources that you like. And so just to wrap up, just like Maggie said, there are different organizations helping out ethnic minorities in Hong Kong. Just add on that is just what I mentioned. A link center is Home Affairs Department sponsored center, like Cheer Center, Shine Center, which is in other district. So we basically located in Kaohsiung district, and we are serving the district members in here, but we are also open to different districts. So for people who are living in around Hong Kong, you can look onto the website from Home Affairs Department and see which center is near you. So no matter you are parents or teachers or ethnic minority yourself, you can see what kind of support can you get from your nearest community. So we have after-school tutorials, we have language classes, English and Chinese. Currently we're doing Korean and Japanese as well. And also for the support for school teachers, we also do help with in-school translation in parents' meeting if you need, and also any challenges that the teacher felt that the communication with the parents or supporting the EM children. So maybe we can help with that as well. But definitely for Subin Foundation and Hong Kong Unison, they have more like established like guidelines or some like textbook support from Maggie as well. That will help you as well. So please feel free to contact us after the sharing as well if you would like to know more about other free service provided by different centers around Hong Kong to support what you are facing at the moment, no matter you are parents or teachers. Thank you so much. So any last questions, or Maggie, do you have anything to add on?
Just keep an eye on our website, I would say, because it's in early stages and we are adding stuff all the time. We have a Facebook page as well. And we put things onto our Facebook page much more quickly than we do the website because it's easier.
Definitely, Facebook. Yeah, it's a very good social media. Yeah, you can. I recommend all of you to search on Facebook for different resources as well, like Maggie's organization, or actually different centers, or Subin Foundation, Hong Kong Unison. We always have the most updated information for your reference, so to support you along the way. Yeah. So thank you so much, everyone, for joining us. Today is our first session, and next Saturday, 3 to 4 p.m., we will have our last human library sharing, which is a Nepalese social worker called Casey. He lived in Hong Kong before the return to China, before 1997, and he had a really interesting story. His parents served the government, the British Army, and then he got a lot of challenges during his teenage life, and he got into a drug abuse problem. And after like more than 10 years of drug abuse, he finally quit taking drugs, and now he's a social worker helping the people in need, especially the ethnic minorities. So I hope all of you can join us next Saturday as well. And last word is thank you for joining us. We have a questionnaire that we will share to you through WhatsApp to let us know what you think and feedbacks for our sharing. Yeah.
Thank you so much, Maggie, for being here with us today. We had a lot of fun listening to you.
Well, thank you. Great initiative. Thank you very much.
All right.
Okay, bye everyone. Take care.
Bye-bye.